Good afternoon. Happy Friday. As I like to say, we made it. My name is Logan Edmonds. I'm CEO of Tabernacle Technology Solutions, and we are here today to talk about cyber risk. Title of our webinar today is Fortifying Future Cyber Risk Tactics for Startups, and for startup founders, investors, and business leaders at startups. The world we're moving into is moving fast, and that's something that startups are really familiar with. I myself started a startup 5 years ago. I'm CEO of Tabernacle Technology Solutions. As I mentioned, we started in 2018 and we grew at breakneck pace up to this point. And so I'm very familiar with the challenge of being a startup. There's always so much to do, not enough time to do it, and the buck often stops with the core team. You got to move fast. However, we need to talk about real risks and a growing risk of that matter. So today the topic's on cyber risk. And cyber risk, quite frankly, and I'm actually going to go ahead and put this up in a second. There we go. Cyber risk. What's going on? Technology innovation is revolutionizing the way that businesses operate. It's providing opportunities for growth, scale, and efficiency like never before. But with most opportunities, and this is definitely the case, there are inherent risks that need to be managed. Does ignoring a risk make it go away? That's the question for today. Does ignoring a risk make it go away? I would argue no. I would argue no. And we are seeing movements in the industry. And if you tune into our podcast, The Binary Business Show, we're talking about a great thing this next coming week where we saw a bigger business, SolarWinds. They were hit over 3 years ago. That was 3 years ago, Logan. That's done and over with, right? No. We actually just discovered SolarWinds is being charged civilly by the SEC, and most specifically, one of its C-level executives, its CISO, is being charged civilly with fraud. They're saying, "Hey, you should have done more cyber risk, so we're going to hold, and it's an adverse effect to your investors. Therefore, we're going to hold you, Mr. CISO, and the company civilly liable for fraud." That's a big deal. If you're doing a startup, one of the end goals often is to go public or to get acquired by a publicly traded company, right? That's where the money's at. But the SEC is trying to set a standard here, and we'll talk more about it on the podcast. But they're trying to whether how they're going about it, and there's a lot of comments around that, and a lot of discussion, and a lot of diverse opinions. But the end result is authorities are starting to care because there are real adverse effects of cyber risk when it's not handled properly to both the investors, the shareholders, and the company itself. So, does ignoring a risk make it go away? That's the question we need to answer today. There are five basic mitigation methods for risk management. There's avoidance, retention, transferring, loss prevention and reduction, and sharing. We're going to talk about each and every one of these today, but keep these in your head for about the presentation. Avoidance, retention, transferring, loss prevention, reduction, and sharing. What is cybersecurity risk? Okay, let's answer this basic question. Cybersecurity risk is really not too complicated in terms of its definition. It refers to the potential for unauthorized access, use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or destruction of information in a business. It can also entail financial losses, damage to an organization's reputation, and legal repercussions. It's influenced by a firm's use of technology, the nature of its business operations, and the strategies in place to safeguard against a range of vulnerabilities and threats. That is a very thorough definition that we came up with to define what the heck is cyber risk. Startups are absolutely being impacted by cyber risk. Just this past year, we saw a mental health startup get hacked. We so-called Cerebral get hacked and expose the information of more than 3 million people. This is an article on the right-hand side from sifted.eu. The headline's pretty eye-catching. Hackers are watching your startup. Not many are prepared for the attack. I'm going to read a quote from this article just to kind of touch on what we're going to be discussing today. It's a quote from sifted.eu. Data breaches are usually associated with big names, huge scandals, and hefty fines. Think Facebook or Google. But startups, too, are the regular targets of malicious online activity. In 2020, hackers leaked 1 million customer emails from French crypto startup Ledger, and it is now facing legal action from dozens of those affected. I'm going to keep going. Hackers aren't just after sensitive data. Cyber attacks can take many different forms, ranging from ransomware, when a company's information or systems are held hostage in exchange for a monetary sum, to cybercrime, tricking someone into sending money to the wrong person. These attackers target organizations of all sizes, but it is a risk often underestimated by startups who just don't see themselves as a prime target for hackers. Especially in the hero days, especially in the early days, from zero to when there are 30, 40, 50 people on board. There isn't much focus on cybersecurity, says E. Kenneth Pensamonte, principal at cyber focused VC Paladin Capital Group. Cybersecurity company Dynarisk recently analyzed the cyber risk profile of portfolio companies for 75 leading VC funds in London, assessing criteria ranging from leaked username and password combinations to to the names of the companies on hacker groups on the dark web, and it found that 70. Sorry, hold on a second. Let me pull this up in here. My face is blocking it. Just let me close my face out for a second. Yeah. Sorry about that. 65% of the portfolio companies showed a high risk of suffering a cyber attack. 65%. I wanted to make sure I had that stat right, so apologies. 65% of 75 VC companies surveyed had significant risk to cyber attack and adverse effects that comes with it. Examples of a cybersecurity risks inside of a startup: phishing attacks. I mean, we all have seen phishing emails. That's when somebody tricks you into sharing sensitive information, like clicking a link and typing in your password, or by pretending to be someone you trust. So you'll give them information you normally wouldn't. Maybe they hack somebody else's email and use that to email you. Phishing is really underestimated, and we'll talk about that in a second, as a threat in terms of financial cost. Ransomware is a type of malware. We've all heard of ransomware, I hope, that locks your data until you pay a ransom. Think MGM Casinos a couple months ago. Think Ace Hardware got hit a couple weeks ago. Think all these companies are in the news all the time. Ransomware is a big deal because it can shut down operations. And even something like outdated software could be considered a cybersecurity risk. Old software that you're using on your firm might have holes in it that hackers can use to get access to your systems that they otherwise might not have. And actually, that is being used a lot. A great example of this, I believe it was in 2022, Kronos, the payroll software provider, had an outdated piece of software running on the front end technology, like a actual exploit. And because of that, thousands of people were unable to make payroll, and they were able to access otherwise data that normally they wouldn't have been able to. It was a big deal. So, just an FYI, the FBI IC3 serves as a public resource for organizations to submit reports of cyber attacks and incidents. So, I looked at the 2022 report, and it had three main takeaways that I gleaned from it. You can read for yourself, and I have some of the stats up here thrown up of ransomware attacks, what we're seeing in Q4 of 2022. Sorry, Q1 of this year versus Q4 of 2024. Sometimes the little icons block things out. Three takeaways. One, business email compromise was a significant threat in 2022. The IC3 received over 21,832 complaints, totaling more than 2.7 billion in adjusted losses. The business email compromise methods have evolved, what we call BEC, and become more sophisticated. Getting into somebody's email can equal some of the most damaging financial outcomes there can be. I had a client a while back that the financial administrator for the organization had their email hacked, and because of that, hackers running about a 3-week scam were able to divert about $115,000 of operating capital to an offshore bank account. A lot of people don't realize this. Bank accounts aren't insured against fraud. The FDIC does not cover fraud, it covers bank failure. So that money has covered under cyber insurance, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if you don't have the right kind of policy, no one's paying that back. Ransomware is another threat that cannot be ignored, and as we've seen this year, it's definitely rising. The IC3 received over 2,385 ransomware complaints in 2022 alone. And the last but not least, call center fraud victims. All over the world, we're seeing a massive, massive uptick in call center losses and the amount call center fraud losses for this attack. There are two different types primarily, either groups impersonating tech support for some kind of well-reputed organization, think Microsoft or Geek Squad, like Best Buy, or impersonating government agencies, think IRS. This attack is often underestimated because we're used to hearing scammers all the time, but there have been unconfirmed rumors and allegations that the incident that led to MGM taking $100 billion loss on this ransomware a couple months ago was a 15-minute phone call called into someone in IT at their organization. Now, we don't have proof yet, but the criminals that performed the attack said that's how they pulled it off. A simple phone call can equal 100, can be the root cause of $100 million loss for a big company. And startups have equal exposure to that. Maybe not in terms of financial liability, but in terms of likelihood. A lot of people think that when they put stuff in the cloud, they're outsourcing the risk. Like, hey, that's someone else's problem, or someone else takes care of the cybersecurity for me. I don't need to worry about this. And unfortunately, that's not how the cloud really works. The cloud is at the end of the day just somebody else's computer. You're saving your data on somebody else's computer. And like with any kind of leasing service, there are some things the service provider will do and some they won't do. 82% of these attacks we're talking about happen in the cloud, whether public, private, or in multiple environments. Microsoft, for example, if you use Microsoft 365 Outlook, their terms and conditions specifically say if your username and password is used to cause a data breach on your account, they have no liability. You agree to that when you click that I accept terms and conditions. Most software as a service providers that I personally come across have something very similar in their terms and conditions. Sure, if someone tries to break into Microsoft's data center where the cloud lives, they'll protect against that. Sure, if someone tries to hack Microsoft Direct and go to your email through them, they'll protect that. But that's not the easiest way for these criminals to go. These criminals have a way easier time going through the end organizations themselves rather than the provider for the most part. 1 second. There we go. Sorry, my live stream killed on my lens screen. I want to make sure I had that right. This is a story that happened. Now, obviously, we've changed key details, as you can see, because this is in the bustling city of Techville. But this is a story of someone we actually dealt with, of a realistic example of what a cyber risk looks like and what a cyber attack looks like in the modern 2023 era. Once upon a time, in the bustling city of Techville, lived a diligent employee named Sarah. Much better. Sarah worked for a small, reputable financial firm and was known for her meticulous attention to detail. One day, while sipping her morning coffee and going through her emails, she received a message that appeared to be from her boss, Mr. Thompson. The email was perfectly crafted, mirroring Mr. Thompson's usual tone and writing style. It read, Sarah, I need you to review this financial report urgently. There seems to be a discrepancy in our accounts. Please check the attached document and get back to me ASAP. The email had an attachment named financial underscore report.pdf. Sarah, being the diligent employee she was, immediately clicked on the attachment, eager to resolve the issue. However, unbeknownst to her, she'd actually just fallen victim to a sophisticated spear phishing attack powered by generative AI. Checking the chat here to make sure we don't have any questions for going to the next part of the story. Okay, here you go. We'll keep on trucking. The email was not from Mr. Thompson, if you hadn't figured this out already, but from a cyber criminal who had used generative AI to mimic Mr. Thompson's writing style. The AI had been trained on numerous emails and documents to create a convincing forgery. The attachment was not a financial report, but a malicious software that now had access to Sarah's computer. Whether you're bootstrapped, pre seed, or preparing an IPO and you're a company, you are a target for cyber criminals. It doesn't matter where you're at in your life cycle. No problem. You have an insurance policy, right? Most time you get to the seed, Series A, they make you take out an insurance policy. Well, cyber insurance used to be a 3-page application 4 years ago that had a couple yes or no questions, and you had $1 million of coverage for $1,000 a year. Easy as that. Actually, I think it was less than that. It was like 800 when I did it. That's not how it is anymore. It feels more like an audit now. We're talking 8, sometimes 10 pages full of technical questions. Do you have multi-factor authentication in place? Do you have annual cybersecurity training? When was the last time you had a penetration test? When was the last vulnerability scan that you had? And we are seeing that you need to attest to that truthfully if you want to get coverage. There was a court case that played out with travelers. It was pretty well publicized last year, where an organization that manufactured electronics got $1 million policy. They checked, yes, we have MFA on the policy, and they didn't actually have it fully. They had it kind of, not really. And travelers made an argument for gross negligence, and they won. They said they, and the court ruled they didn't have to pay. And then travelers also won on appeal. So you have to be accurate on these applications, and the carriers expect you to have a minimum threshold for risk tolerance. They're not going to absorb everything with no caveats. Um, so when's the last time you filled out the application form? What happens if you're not 100% accurate in the application? What happens if your application, ooh, this is a good one, your policy has financial exclusions? These are all questions you need to ask. Here's the security challenge where the carriers are a little bit wigged out, and honestly, why cybersecurity professionals are wigged out too about this issue. Half of companies lost 11 to 20% of their client base after a ransomware breach. 92.4% of the attacks are delivered via email. On average, it takes about 120 days to discover a data breach has actually happened. And that's, of course, excluding the situations like ransomware, where it becomes pretty obvious that you've been hacked, or a business email compromise that ends up in financial losses. Those two, when you're just having someone steal your data, it takes usually about 4 months to figure out they were in your stuff. On malware attack victims, 58% of them are considered small businesses. So the ratio is actually shifted more for small businesses. Why? Small business is the backbone of the American economy. 50% of the economy flows through it. And 60% of small and medium sized businesses go under within 6 months of a breach. A lot of people look at big companies, and I want to take a minute to chat on this, and then we're going to open up for questions. A lot of people look at big companies and say, well, they got hacked a few years ago and they're fine now. So it's probably fine, right? That's true, to be honest with you. Long term, people have a short term attention span. You can usually recover from being hacked long term. Short term, however, is a different story. A lot of times you're going to take a hit financially, whether from regulatory reasons, someone actually stole money from you, you have customer revenue that dips because customers, you're going to lose about, like I said, 11 to 20% of your revenue on the customer base immediately. These are all things that can put a not well financed company under, especially if they have to do 6 months of that. 6 months is about how long this process takes. I am not an insurance professional, so take this with a grain of salt. That being said, my experience working with cyber insurance claims, for example, if you have insurance, the payout usually takes somewhere between 2 to 4 months to get your money. So if you're running and paying all these bills and seeing loss of customer revenue because you have to disclose within 30 to 60 days, but you're not getting a payout until 4 months in because forensics has to happen. Like the insurance carrier is going to bring in the forensics team. They're going to hire a breach coach to figure out what has to be done from the state and legal side of things for regulatory reasons. All 50 states in the United States have data breach disclosure laws. You have to disclose if you've been hacked. A lot of people don't know that. It doesn't. There's no size exception on those laws for the most part. So this takes time, and it's a really tricky problem. So how do you respond to these cyber threats? That's what you're here to learn. Obviously, you know now that hackers are treating this like a job. They are treating it like a job, and they are using tools like automation and AI to cast a wider net with very little effort. And people are saying to me, well, I'm a startup, I'm in stealth. I really don't have, no one's targeting me. You're probably right. No one's actually targeting you. This is not a sniper approach. They are taking a shotgun spray and pray approach when it comes to this, blasting out tens of millions of phishing emails per day, connecting to anything they can find on the internet, seeing what they can get their hooks into, and then figuring out how to do their scams. It's a smash and grab strategy. Because of that, the security landscape has changed dramatically, even over the last year. Okay, cyber risk checks. Remember that little slide I showed you, the 5 methods of cyber risk, managing, or sorry, 5 methods of managing risk? Can we avoid it? No. The easy answer to that is no. Statistically speaking, you will get hit sooner or later. It's not a matter of if, it's when. And the math backs us up on that. Can we share it with other people? Not really. At least not to a meaningful amount. SaaS platforms like Microsoft and Google specifically waive liability for risk involving individual account access in their terms and conditions. So if your account, your email's popped and it's through your username and password, you have to prove to Microsoft that it wasn't your username and password for them to even do anything. And that's one of the reasons why they're fine and dandy with the current situation. It doesn't affect their bottom line for the most part. Can we transfer it? Ooh, this is a good one. This is what insurance does, right? Yes and no. Yes and no. I am not a cyber insurance salesperson, nor am I a risk advisor in cyber insurance. And I have to be very clear about that. Carriers want to do right, but the landscape has changed so dramatically. I was even talking to a carrier last week at a conference. They're just trying to figure out how to navigate it. Premiums are way higher. I will tell you that for certain. My premium used to be a sub $1,000. Now, for my organization, I'm paying six, seven, $8,000 a year, depending on the policy, to get my same insurance. Uh, the applications are requiring the insured to attest that they're actually taking meaningful risk mitigation measures. And more often than not, if you can get a policy, there are sublimits in there. What is a sublimit, you're asking? And again, not a licensed insurance agent. I can't say that enough. Talk to your insurance agent for specifics about any individual policy. But a sublimit, you have an aggregate, which is like the master amount, $1 million, $2 million, whatever. A sublimit is a sub amount beneath that. So, for example, you might have a $2 million cyber insurance policy, but in the event of financial fraud, you only have coverage, a sublimit of $250,000. A lot of these policies have a checklist of sublimits. Most of the ones I've reviewed in the last 2 years do, including my own. So the complete transfer of this risk is not really attainable, not 100%. And if you get hit and have to cash the policy, trying to get insurance again can be a real challenge. And a lot of places are requiring it now. That leaves us with two practical options, really, realistically speaking. I'll leave the transferring section to you and your insurance agent. You can retain the risk that's left over, or you can reduce the risk. I don't think anybody with any common sense would say they want to retain the risk. It's just not really a good methodology, obviously. So we need to look at reducing the risk. Is now the time to start reducing your risk, to start managing your risk, is the question you need to answer yourself. I mean, you just got to Google startup cyber attack, and you're going to get, and you add your area, go ahead and add your area, add your city. You're going to get tons of things that pop up. So if it's the time to start reducing to manage your risk, what do you need to do? You need to get the data to make the right decisions for your business. I'm going to pause here for a moment for 60 seconds. I'm going to put a little thing up and I'm going to leave time for anyone to ask questions. So 60 seconds, go ahead and ask some questions in the chat and we'll come back in 60 seconds. Welcome back. Okay, we left off at how do we make the decisions that are right for our business? Well, we need to get the data in order to address this problem. You need to identify your current risk exposure. I recommend a cybersecurity risk assessment, whether through my firm or another accredited firm, reputable firm. It's a professional consulting engagement that investigates your current security position. It determines how susceptible the business is to an attack, It examines how likely your staff or employees are to enabling or furthering the attack. It identifies physical and procedural weaknesses in the business that enable most attackers, and it identifies the most likely at risk business assets. Our cybersecurity risk assessment looks a lot like the following: it's an executive sponsor meeting, then there's a security policy interview, a physical environment inspection, a network review, a data review, an intellectual property review, user and systems review. We do dark web research and a team behavior test. We provide the findings and recommendations in an executive sponsored led presentation, and we give you a consultation to help your make an executive plan on managing your risk based on the findings of the report. So we have a special offer today. And if you want to go full for the cybersecurity risk assessment, I would strongly recommend to scan the QR code or go to the link in our banner below. That'll schedule you for a free, no strings attached, no commitment, free cyber strategy session. However, maybe you're not there yet. Maybe you need a little time to think about it. Well, I want to give you something to help. On the screen, you're going to see a QR code. This QR code is for a free book on a DIY how to build your own cyber risk program. Go ahead and take that. That is all yours. We want you to stay safe out there. If you would like to download the book for free, no, again, no strings attached, you can do so at the link posted right here. Well, that's it for me, guys. As always, let me know if you have any questions. Please schedule the free cyber strategy session if you'd like. Otherwise, have a great weekend and have a great Thanksgiving holiday.